In this lecture, I'll go over the difference in flat shading, smooth shading, and auto smooth shading. So by default, new objects are added in with flat shading, meaning every single face on the object appears flat. So this gives the object a very faceted look, as you can see. And this is great for things like the cube here, which we don't want to look smooth because it has very sharp angles. So we want to keep that flat shading. However, you'll often want to have a smooth look on the surface, like for the monkey head here, for example. So for that, we'll need smooth shading, which will basically just blend all the face shading together, producing a smoother surface. And you can access the shading options by first selecting your object, then right-click, and you can shade it as flat or shade it as smooth. So let's select smooth, and there we go. Those are the results of that. Now we can also go into edit mode and make some faces smooth and some faces flat. For example, I'll go into front view, tab into edit mode, I'll deselect everything and just select all the faces on the right side of the monkey head. Now I'll go up into the face menu here and select shade flat. And there we go. So the left half or the right side of the monkey head is smooth and the left side is all faceted because it's flat shaded now. Now sometimes you want an object to have both flat shading and smooth shading, kind of like what I just showed you with the monkey head there. But there's another option to automate that called auto smooth. So let's take this object as an example right here. You can see most of it is kind of cube-like, so we want those sharp edges to remain sharp, but we want this rounded corner here to be smoothed out. And for that we'll use auto smooth. So the first thing we'll do is right click on it and choose shade smooth, just to see how it looks. You can see right now it's smoothing out even all the 90-degree angle, so it's giving us this weird smooth shading all throughout. Now let's go over to the object data buttons, and let's go into the normals panel, and we'll enable this option called auto smooth. And there we go. So what's happening right now is it's automatically smoothing out angles based on the angle set right here. So anything that's 30 degrees or any angle that's 30 degrees or less will become smoothed out, and any angle above 30 degrees remains sharp. So these 90-degree angles remain sharp, but these angles along this bevel right here are all less than 30 degrees, so they get smoothed out. Now it's important to note that for this option to work, the object has to be set as smooth. If we right click and choose shade flat, it's going to be flat shaded regardless of whether this option is enabled. So make sure you right click and shade it as smooth before enabling that option. And that's basically all there is to the basics of smooth and flat shading. We'll be working more throughout the course with different ways to give your objects the perfect shading, but that's going to do it for this lecture, so I'll see you in the next one. In this lecture, we'll go over what collections and view layers are and how to use them. Collections are basically just a way of organizing all the objects in your scene into groups. They're similar to layers in older versions of Blender. Now in the outliner over here, you can see the collection information. By default, when you open up Blender, you'll have a camera, you'll have a cube, and a lamp. And you can see that they're all listed right over here. And if you click on them to select them, you can see that it selects them in the 3D view as well. And you can even toggle their visibility using these icons right here. Now at the top right here, you'll notice that there's one main scene collection that contains everything in your scene. Within this main scene collection, you can create your own collections in order to organize your objects. Now the default objects are already organized into this collection right here. So let me double click on this and we'll rename this to default objects so that we're more descriptive about what this collection contains. Now whatever collection is active is the collection new objects will be added into. So if this collection right here is selected, or any objects within this collection are selected, then when we go to add in a new object, like a monkey head, you can see that Suzanne gets added into that collection right there. And if we select the main scene collection right there, for example, and I add in, say, a cone, you can see the cone is not added into the default objects collection. It's added into the main scene collection here. But now let's say we wanted to move this cone into a new collection, a collection all its own. We'll make sure that the cone is selected, and then we'll press the M key for the move to collection, and then we can create a new collection here or move it to one of the other collections. But I'll create a new collection, and we can rename it here. So I'll rename this to Cones Only, and then click on OK. And you can see it adds in that Cones Only collection in the scene collection, and it adds the cone into that. Now it's easy to move objects between collections as well. For example, if we select default objects and we add another cone in, well, that cone is in the wrong collection now. I want to move that to cones only. And we can do that two ways. We can either press the M key over the 3D view and we can move it to the cones only collection, or we can even click on it there and drag it down to cones only. And there we go. And there are other ways to create new collections as well. You can press this button at the top right here to add a new collection, or you can even right click and you can create a new collection that way. And to delete a collection, simply select it and either press X or the delete key. If you were to say delete a collection that had some objects in it, this is what happens. I'll delete that, and you can see the two objects that were in it, they go back to the main scene collection here by default. So let me undo that, and there we go. Now let's say we wanted this first cone to be part of multiple collections. Well, in order to do that, we can do two things. We can go to the object properties over here, go into the collections panel, and we can link this cone to other collections by clicking on add to collection, and we'll choose default objects. Now you can see cone pops up in both of these collections now. And in order to unlink it from either of those collections, what you can do is right click on it and choose unlink. Now the other way to get this cone to appear in both collections is to, over the 3D view, press Shift and M, and that will link to collection, and we can link it to whatever collection we want. So I'm going to link that back to default objects, and now it's in both collections again. And there are other ways to remove it from a collection as well. For example, we can just go down to the collections panel here and click on either of these X's to remove it from that group. You can also press the hotkey Control, Alt, and G, and it's going to bring up a menu to remove something from the collection, and we can just remove it from the collection here. So I'll remove it from default objects, and now it's back to just cones only. Be careful though, if the object is only in one collection and you unlink it from that collection, it'll basically be like deleting it. So for example, I'll press Control, Alt, and G, and I'll remove it from the cones only group, and you can see it's just gone now. And if at any point you forget any of the hotkeys for this stuff, you can find that in the object menu here too, down in the collection submenu. Now you can also nest collections within other collections. For example, we can take cones only collection here, and I can drag that into default objects. Now the default objects collection also contains the cones only subcollection. Now you may not want every single object in these collections to be listed. In that case, you can use these arrows here to collapse the collections if you want, which is pretty obvious. But you can also use the plus and minus signs on your numpad to expand and collapse your entire outliner list, which makes things a little bit easier. Now let me select the camera and the lamp. I'll press M and I'll move them to a new collection called Extra Stuff. Come on. And let me move cones only back to the main scene collection so we have three separate collections now. Now let's say all these other objects are getting in the way of me getting the right settings for the camera and the lamp or whatever, and I just want the Extra Stuff collection to be visible and everything else to be invisible. Well, you can go ahead and individually turn off visibility for each of the other collections, leaving only the Extra Stuff collection visible, but that can be really time consuming if you have a whole list of collections. So the hotkey to speed that up is to hold Control and click on the visibility icon of the collection that you want to see. And it makes everything else invisible and only leaves this collection visible. So this is a really quick way to isolate one collection that you want to work with. Then if you want all the other collections visible again, hold Control and click on the visibility icon again, and it makes everything else visible again. Keep in mind that these visibility icons right here are just for 3D viewport visibility. If, for example, we made the cones only collection invisible, it's still going to render in the end. It's only invisible in the 3D view. But for example, if we went into camera view, let me zoom out a little bit because I know the cone's over here somewhere, and I press F12 to render, you can see the cones are still visible. So these icons only are for 3D viewport visibility. One way that you can disable rendering of a collection though is to just disable the collection itself using the checkbox next to it right here. When that's unchecked, the collection is invisible in the viewport and in renders. For example, if I go to render, now you can see the cone does not render. And that pretty much does it for the basics of collections. It's a really great system for organizing your scene, especially if your scene becomes more and more complex. Now let's move on to view layers. View layers are another level of organizing where we can make some collections visible or invisible. Do you remember how we had to manually disable visibility of other collections if we wanted to look at just one of them alone? Well, we can actually create something called view layers that have visibility presets so we can just switch back and forth to them. And this is very similar to the layer system in older versions of Blender. This also replaces render layers from older versions of Blender, but in this lecture we're just going to use view layers for organization and workflow purposes. So at the top right here, we have the View Layers menu, and you can see there's already a default view layer set up, and it's called View Layer. But let's rename this to Full Scene to let us know that this view layer is going to have everything visible. Now the outliner down here can actually display different things, and we have the display menu right here, and you can see we can have it display scenes, view layers, sequence, and other information. By default, it's set to View Layer, so everything we're seeing in the outliner right here is all the information for this current view layer. So this is also where we're going to be making changes for each of the different view layers that we create. So let's actually create a new view layer. So I'm going to go up here to the view layers, and we're going to click on this button to add a new one. And let's rename this one to No Cones. And in this view layer, we're going to disable visibility of the cones collection. So here's the cones only collection. I can turn off visibility by clicking on that icon right there. So now if we switch back and forth between the view layers, you can see that their visibility settings have been saved to each of those view layers. So if I wanted to see the whole scene visible, I'll switch to Full Scene. If I want to see the whole scene except the cones, I'll switch to No Cones. And this also works for individual objects as well. For example, if we go to the No Cones layer and we turn off visibility for the Suzanne head and we switch back to Full Scene, you can see those visibility settings are saved as well. So when you have really complex scenes, you may want to not only organize things into collections, but also into view layers as well. Now this collection here that we've made invisible is actually still accessible in this view layer, meaning we can still toggle on and off its visibility using that icon, and also if we hold Control and click on other collections visibility icons, you can see that has an effect on the cones only visibility as well. Now if we wanted to make this invisible all the time and not accessible from this view layer, what we can do is, instead of clicking on that icon, we can click on the checkbox right there to exclude this collection from this view layer. And now in this view layer, we cannot toggle on the visibility of the cones only collection. That's always going to be invisible. So if we wanted to see that collection again, we'd have to either re-enable it, or we can go to a view layer that has that visible. So those are the basic mechanics for both collections and view layers. And as your scenes get more complex and you gain more experience, you'll get an idea of how you feel most comfortable organizing everything using these tools. Now there are some other options I want to go over real quick as well. Let's go up into the filter menu of the outliner right here, and we're going to enable all these icons right there. We won't go over the last two as they're more for rendering effects. Now just like with the visibility icons right here, all of these other toggle values get saved to the current view layer, so you can set them differently for each view layer. Now the first icon on the left here is for selectability. If this is disabled, you won't be able to select any objects in that collection. So for example, if we turn off selectability for the Suzanne head, you can see I can select every object except that one. And there may be circumstances in which you want to make one object like that or an entire group of objects unselectable in the 3D view, and that's when you would turn off their selectability right there. Now we know the eyeball icon is for visibility as we've seen, but this toggles visibility for the current view layer only. If we wanted to make something invisible in all view layers, then we use the monitor icon next to that. So for example, if I wanted to turn off global visibility for the cube object there, I'll click on the monitor icon to turn it off, and let's check it out in another view layer here. So I went to a different view layer and you can see it's still turned off in that view layer. Now, just like the eyeball icon for visibility, the monitor icon only affects visibility for the 3D viewport. It does not affect render visibility. So turning that off is still going to make that object render in the end. If you want to turn off render visibility, then you would use the camera icon at the end here. So for example, if we didn't want the cube to render, I'll turn off the camera icon for that, and I'll press F12, and as you can see, the cube does not render in the end. And that icon in the end is actually not specific to the view layer. For example, if we change the layer over to no cones, you can see that icon is still turned off, so that's kind of like a global toggle. So that does it for those options, and now just as a quick mention, if your scene is really complex with tons of different objects, you can actually use the search field up here to seek out a particular object or collection. Like if we wanted to find an object called cone, I'll type in cone and it gives me a whole list of cone results. And now there's one last thing to go over. So once you've got all your objects grouped into collections, you can actually add linked copies of that entire collection into your scene. So for example, let me left click on the default objects collection and I'll drag that into the 3D view over here. You can see it creates what's called an instance, which is basically an empty type object that's displaying a copy of the original. Now you can't access these objects or tab into edit mode or anything like that. It's just displaying a copy of the original, but they are linked to the original. So if I change the original collection in any way, then the linked copies will change as well. So they're sort of kind of like linked duplicates. And this can be really useful if you have a group of objects that you want to scatter all throughout a scene, like a car, for example, which would be composed of many different objects and collections. Adding an instance of the main car collection will add in linked copies that you can place all around your scene. And collection instancing in 2.8 is what groups were in older versions of Blender. Now, another way to add in collection instances is through the Add menu. So if I place the cursor over there and press Shift and A for the Add menu, I can go down to Collection Instance and I can add in an instance of any of the collections that I have. And voila. And alright, so that's going to do it for this. Collections and view layers are some seriously cool and powerful upgrades to the scene organization tools in Blender. For simpler scenes, you actually might not even need to use these at all, but as your scenes get more complex, you'll be happy these tools exist, and you'll eventually develop preferences when it comes to how you like things organized. But that's going to do it for this topic, so I'll see you in the next lecture.